Hi, everyone. Welcome to Organic Science. Curated by the Organic Guy and aided by AI, Organic Science shares hidden, hard-to-digest organic and sustainable farming research as bite-sized, brain-friendly insights you can use daily.
And today we're unpacking something really fascinating.
Yeah. What's on the menu?
It's about the potential link between eating organic food and, well, how sharp your mind stays as you get older, cognitive function.
Okay. That's definitely a hot topic. Ways to support brain health long-term. Everyone's interested in that.
Absolutely. And we've got some specific research to look at. A study just published, actually, December 2024.
Oh, recent then.
Yeah, in the European Journal of Nutrition. It's by Xiu Li and some colleagues. And they used data from the U.S. Health and Retirement Study.
The HRS. Good data source.
Right, and also the healthcare and nutrition study, so pretty solid stuff.
Definitely. Those are large, well-respected data sets. We're talking thousands of U.S. adults.
Mm.
And importantly, they didn't just take a snapshot. They followed almost 5,000 people over several years.
That longitudinal part, yeah, that seems key.
It is, because it lets you look at changes over time,
Mm.
not just comparing different people now, but seeing how individuals change.
Right, so what was the mission here? What were they trying to figure out?
Well, fundamentally, they wanted to examine that relationship, organic food intake and cognitive function, specifically in middle-aged and older adults.
Okay.
And they were particularly interested in whether eating organic might affect the risk of developing mild cognitive impairment,
Mhm.
MCI.
MCI, right. That's kind of that gray area before more serious decline sometimes.
Exactly. And they found some pretty compelling results, including some differences that were a bit surprising, based on sex, for instance.
Okay, intriguing. So how did they actually measure this? Like, who's eating organic and how's their brain doing?
Right. So for the diet part, they used a standard tool. It's called a food frequency questionnaire, an FFQ.
Okay.
Basically, you ask people, how often they eat certain foods, and crucially, whether they were the organic versions.
Got it. So they could categorize people based on their organic intake?
Yeah. How often, what kinds of organic foods. And then for cognition, they use something called a Langowere classification.
Langowere.
Yeah, it's a pretty common method researchers use. It groups people based on cognitive test performance. So, normal cognition, MCI, or dementia.
Okay, so track the organic eating habits, track the cognitive status over time using the system. Simple enough in concept. What did they find, like, overall?
Well, looking across the whole group, the initial picture was positive. People reporting more organic food consumption tended to have better cognitive function scores generally.
Okay, so a general thumbs up. More organic, better scores. But you mentioned nuances and the sex difference.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting, especially when they looked at the risk of actually developing MCI over the study period.
Uh-huh.
They found that, yes, consuming organic food was associated with a reduced risk of incident MCI.
Yeah.
But here's the kicker.
Okay.
This reduction, the statistically significant reduction, was only seen in the female participants.
Wait, really? Only women showed a significant drop in MCI risk from eating organic. That feels unexpected.
It is quite striking. For females, the hazard ratio was 0.80.
0.80. What does that translate to, practically?
It essentially means, based on this data, that the women eating organic had about a 20% lower risk of developing MCI compared to women who didn't.
20% lower risk. That's not trivial.
Not at all. And the confidence interval, the range around that number, didn't cross 1, which, in statistics, tells us it's unlikely to be just chance.
And for men?
For men, well, there might have been a slight trend towards lower risk, numerically speaking, but it didn't reach that threshold of statistical significance in this particular study.
Huh. Okay. That's a really specific finding. A 20% lower risk for women is substantial. Did they look at different kinds of organic food? Was it just fruits and veggies or?
They did. Yeah, they drilled down a bit further. They separated out organic animal foods and organic plant foods.
Ah, okay. So like organic meat, dairy, eggs on one side.
Exactly.
Versus organic fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes on the other.
Precisely. And what they found was that both categories showed independent links to a lower risk of developing MCI.
Right. Both.
Yeah.
Independently.
Yeah. Consuming organic animal foods was linked to about a 27% reduction in risk, and organic plant foods separately were linked to about a 20% reduction.
Wow. Oh, wait, hold on. So let me get this straight. The overall significant effect on MCI risk reduction was only seen in women.
Correct. For the combined organic intake.
But when you break it down, both organic animal products and organic plant products seem to offer some protection against MCI risk for everyone, or at least showed an association.
The paper reports those independent associations, yeah. A 27% risk reduction associated with organic animal foods and 20% with organic plant foods when looking at incident MCI risk.
That just raises more questions, doesn't it? What could possibly be driving this? Especially the sex difference, but also these independent plant and animal effects.
That is absolutely the million-dollar question, isn't
Yeah.
it? And, we have to remember this is an observational study. It shows associations, links. It doesn't definitively prove cause and effect.
Right, correlation isn't causation. Always the caveat.
Always. But it strongly suggests something is going on. Now, if we speculate on the why might organic matter? Well, the obvious one is lower exposure to synthetic pesticides.
Yeah, that's usually the first thing people think of. And some pesticides have raised neurological concerns.
Exactly. But it might not just be about avoiding negatives. It could also be about potential differences in the food itself, maybe different
Yes.
nutrient profiles.
Like higher levels of antioxidants, maybe? Or certain types of fats?
Could be things that actively support brain health.
Yeah.
Or, another angle, the gut microbiome.
Ah, the gut-brain axis. That's huge right now.
It is.
Yeah.
And diet profoundly impacts the microbiome. So maybe the differences between organic and conventional farming practices lead to foods that foster a healthier gut environment, which in turn benefits the brain.
Okay, so potential pathways. Fewer pesticides, maybe more beneficial nutrients, possibly a better effect on the gut microbiome.
Plausible mechanisms, yeah.
And could any of those factors interact differently with male and female biology? Could that explain why the overall significant MCI risk reduction popped out mainly for women?
That's definitely a hypothesis this data brings up.
Yeah.
There are hormonal differences, metabolic differences between sexes, maybe differences in how environmental factors like pesticide residues are processed or how nutrients are utilized. And the fact that both organic animal and plant foods showed these independent links, it suggests it might not be just one single magic bullet in organic food.
Right, not just no pesticides.
Exactly. It could be a combination, maybe reduced exposure to certain things plus increased intake of others. Or maybe different factors are important in the animal-derived foods versus the plant-derived ones.
It really highlights just how complex this intersection of diet and brain health is, and, how maybe a one-size-fits-all recommendation isn't quite right.
I think that's a key takeaway. This study adds a really important piece to that puzzle. It gives us a strong suggestion of a link between organic food and lower MCI risk, especially, it seems, for women in this group. And it points towards multiple factors involving both plant and animal sources.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the core message from this deep dive. We have this study showing a positive association overall between eating organic and cognitive function in middle-aged and older adults.
Check.
And crucially, finding a statistically significant reduction in the risk of developing mild cognitive MCI, but specifically for the female participants in this cohort, about a 20% reduction.
Right. That was the standout finding for overall organic consumption and MCI risk.
But then, adding another layer, the data also suggested that consuming organic animal foods and organic plant foods, when looked at separately, were both independently associated with a reduced risk of MCI.
Yeah, around 27% for animal and 20% for plant, independently.
So it really does underscore that, choosing organic diets might have real potential cognitive benefits. And it strongly suggests that when we're thinking about dietary advice for brain health, we might need to get more nuanced. Maybe consider tailoring advice, potentially even factoring in sex-specific differences.
This research definitely pushes the conversation that way, I think. It flags these factors as important considerations.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a really interesting question to chew on. Given that both organic animal and plant foods in this study seem to have these independent links to reduced MCI risk, what are the specific things within that organic label that might be driving these effects? Is it just about avoiding synthetic pesticides, or are there actual meaningful differences in nutrient content?
Or is it the microbiome changes?
Exactly. Or could it even be something else entirely? Maybe lifestyle factors that tend to cluster with choosing organic. And then, how do all these potential factors interact differently with male versus female biology to potentially explain that sex-specific finding for the overall MCI risk?
Lots to unpack still.
Definitely. Something to ponder next time you're in the grocery aisle.